And Rhiannon, we need not too much of an introduction, but I'm going to give a little bit on anyway.
Sure.
And I made my handwritten notes. I just want to say you was the only female crew member, and the first openly queer woman set to break through the Kármán line where space begins. And your work blurs the lines between fact and fiction, and you often explore the topics of isolation and memory and the human tendency to create and destroy. And all this you were planning on taking with you to space.
Mm-hmm.
Should we talk about that? Should we
Which
start
bit?
there?
All of it.
How was the idea born?
Well, so I didn't come up with the concept of wanting to go to space. This is, I don't think that ever in a million years did I think there would ever be an opportunity for someone like me, who sounds like me and looks like me, to go to space, unless you're talking about Spock, who there is a striking resemblance.
You look a little bit spacey.
Yeah, a little bit,
Yeah.
But so in the middle of the pandemic, I was grounded like every other photographer. We were all stuck, and I really thought that my career was slightly over. As a documentarian that is traveling to far-flung places, it was the worst kind of claustrophobia. While everyone else was being signed off work with pay, I was sitting there just watching my bank balance dwindle and wondering what was next. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should apply to this artist residency." And I was like, "Ugh, well, I can't really apply to artist residency now because I can't travel." But she went, no, it's not like that kind of artist residency. It's in space.
There's no corona in space yet.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I applied for this artist residency. It was basically a Japanese billionaire called Yusaku Maezawa. And he had bought every single seat on the first lunar circumnavigation planned to take place on SpaceX's Starship, which is the biggest rocket ever made. And the plan for Starship, which you can kind of see some pictures in the background of Starship in various stages of its right now on the pad, and then at some point it kind of explodes in midair, and you'll see that. But anyway, so we were meant to be going around the moon and coming back again, following the trajectory of Apollo 8.
Yeah.
And I applied for it not thinking that there was any way I was going to get there. So 1 million people applied for it. I went through a lot of Zoom interviews,
so 1 million people applied for it. That's a lot of people.
Quite a lot.
When do we get to see the application?
Well, the application was in lots of stages. The initial application was the most basic of things. It was like, as an artist, you always used to apply for residency. So you have all of the things. Send me a bio. Okay, yeah, sure, copy, paste. Send me an artist statement. Sure, copy, paste. You have all this stuff, right? So I wasn't starting it from scratch. But then it was, writing proposals and coming up with ideas of what we were going to create. And the original plan for the project was that they wanted to have a kind of like a reset. So the way that
a reset of what?
A reset for humanity in a way, to encourage the sense of world peace through the artistic creation that we were going to bring back to Earth. So that was the idea of it. And when you think back over time and you look at, Bill Anders on Apollo 8, took Earthrise.
It's that guy over there.
Yeah. So he took the Earthrise photograph, which is the most reproduced photograph in human history. And it really kickstarted the environmental movement. And it was somewhat accidental. It wasn't that they went out there with that as being a mission. And so our mission, the only mission, was to make work that was to inspire kind of global change. That was the idea of it. So we had different people from different perspectives, musicians, filmmakers, me. But yeah, I ended up being the only woman on the 8-person crew, and there were 2 backup crew who were women. And so it was the first time that artists were going to have the opportunity to go to space and deep space. And I think what is interesting and what was inspiring for me about the mission really was the fact that up until now, every person that's gone to space has gone there really with a purpose. They've gone there with like a list of things that they have to achieve and things that they have to do. And our only thing that we had to do was to just absorb and translate and be this kind of mouthpiece. And
isn't that the essence of all artistic outlets,
creation.
not having a purpose and just to absorb and put it into a context and see what comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, the artist's job is basically to be the cultural commentator.
Yeah.
We're there to be the critics. We're there to poke holes in things. We're there to stir the pot, make the uncomfortable truths visible. And I think space has been so much the preserve of this idea of perfection, of the people that get to go to space. They're either incredibly wealthy, you've bought your way in, or you have dedicated your entire life to the pursuit and quest of exploration and science. And there hasn't been this opportunity for anyone that doesn't fit that mold. And so you don't see people like me because there isn't a place within that ecosystem.
That field.
So for us, it was such a luxurious position to be placed in, but it was also, like, I felt deeply important, because as we're traveling through this kind of second space age, it's becoming ever more important, I think, to be critical of the powers that be and who gets to make the decisions. And it felt wild to me, actually, that there was this opportunity for us to be invited to have a seat at the table, to be critics of the system that we were participating in.
But isn't that the beauty of a system, to build in the criticism, to be able to perfect itself on the way, so to speak?
I mean, it should be.
Yeah. Well,
then
it got cancelled.
Yeah, it got cancelled. So they cancelled it. So it took 3 years of our lives. So we were selected in 2021, and they cancelled it in June this year. And it's been a massive reset for me. I think the hardest part for me is that once you see your life in a certain way, or you see this, like, door open and close, it's not just, you've been, like, living and breathing it. So you're not just feeling the loss for yourself, but you're feeling the loss for what this means, more importantly, going forwards within the space industry, and what that kind of catastrophic loss of not having that critical component. Because now we're kind of witnessing this environment that is just progressing at such pace, but without anyone kind of going, hang on a minute, maybe we should think about this in a more sensitive way. Maybe we should incorporate these elements early on. And our role in that is a loss, not just for us and all of our crew members, but, just for everyone actually going forwards.
Isn't that the case, though, that we sometimes think of the human race as having a curse, or maybe not, it's just our nature, maybe, but we tend to destroy rather than create. But we want to create art about what it felt like being destroyed or destroying. And this is such a good encapsulation of that, in a way. So we want to use art and help art make us feel things and explore things and be curious about things, but we never want to put it in the front seat when it actually matters. And do you think that we will be able to fight that curse, or that part of our nature that is so negative and so destroying?
I mean, I don't have the highest of hopes for humanity. I'm a little bit nihilistic in this sense. Like, I don't know. I make a lot of work that deals with complicated histories, and the way that it feels like Groundhog Day, that we live in this kind of historical cycle where we're really great at having hindsight, but then we're good at pointing out the flaws with the things that we did, but we're not great at learning the lessons from those things and then applying them to the future. It's like we have some kind of blindness when it comes to that. So I don't have the greatest of hopes. I think, at some point humanity would run itself into the ground, because we are fundamentally selfish.
Yeah.
We are, I don't think that we're the greatest thing since sliced bread.
I mean, if we play with the idea, like if we as a human race would write the CV, so to speak, to apply for residency at another planet.
Yeah.
They hire us, accept us based on what we do here. And this is also but the similarities between what you faced within this project and everything that happened with your art that we are watching in this exhibition, I think it's very like the AI situation that we're going through today. How do you reason with that?
I mean, I think, AI is coming into every single part of our lives. And I think that what has been interesting to me, particularly witnessing what has happened with AI, is how many people who have been involved since the ground up with developing AI systems are now going, whoa, that was a mistake. I'm really sorry. Too late. And I feel that now we're having that same moment with the space industry. And I think that there is a point where private enterprise has taken over to the point where, unless we kind of start having that critical engagement and really thinking about what we're doing, and for it to become a more for the general public to understand that this isn't just something that the preserve of sci-fi films. Like AI was the preserve of sci-fi films for so long that we kind of thought, oh, let's watch the film AI. How interesting. Oh, how quaint. It's something happening in distant future. The same thing with space. It's like these things were actually real all along. People have been developing AI systems for, decades. But now we're seeing the result of it. It's the same thing with the space industry. It's been happening the whole time, but now we're seeing the results of it. But you don't want to come into any system when it's kind of too late to do anything about it or too late to make change.
It's built already.
Yeah. And so I think we need to have much more cultural awareness of our own ties to these things, because it affects our day-to-day life. And I think space right now, it feels it's abstract, but actually it's going to be our future. It's going to be what we live in.
It sometimes feel like people say, oh, I don't want to talk about politics and I'm not a political person. And they don't understand that politics actually dictate our everyday lives and our jobs and our schools and what we eat and how we live. And so this is the same, of course, with space and everything else in this human era that we're facing. We have to be more tapped in, right? What would you say your biggest recommendation for someone who wants to start to understand and be more tapped into this? Where should I start?
I mean, I think a lot of it is, we need to kind of look at the risks. What are when you think back, okay, like when you're looking at the space industry and you're thinking, okay, it's just cool. We're just seeing rocket launches. It's like, who owns it? What else are they saying? What else are they doing? It's finding the kind of hidden web of associations. And who is paying who for what? It's always the age-old adage. I'm always like, follow the money. Whenever I start with any project, it's always like, follow the money. You want to know about anything in life, just follow the money. And that's kind of how I work so often, is like, who's seeking to benefit and who is set to win? Who is seeking control? And I think, it's quite easy to see with so many of the companies, like the leading companies who are involved in the space industry right now. You're talking about like Jeff Bezos, you're talking about Elon Musk, you're talking about literally the money. So, we have to kind of have a bit of a critical engagement. As much as I think these things are incredible and I am like such a hype girl for progress on some levels, I'm also like quite cautious about certain things. And, my thought has always been, you need to have the right people having a seat at the table. And without having more of a cultural consciousness around the way that these systems are working, there is never going to be the right people having a seat at the table.
I mean, the space is very, very isolated, of course. And you work with isolations in so many ways in all your projects. And of course, and you grow up on a boat. That's also isolated. That also had to suck, by the way. Is that something that you feel is like, can we only create or exist if we isolate ourselves from everything else? Is that the path we...
my work, I often look at things in isolation because I think it's easier to understand the flaws in humanity when you have a smaller sample size. I think when you try to like look at the whole world, it feels overwhelming. It's like if you try to fix everything, it's overwhelming. But if you start looking at like a very small corner, you go, okay, well, these are things you could implement to make this better. Or this is a way of looking at it like under a microscope instead of looking in this maximalist way. And I think that, when I've been experiencing like living alongside this space world, it's been very much like a race to win at the technology and often forgetting like the small parts. And that's always the mistake. And so I like to look at things in isolation. But, when I was thinking about leaving the Earth and looking back, you're looking at a small point size. It's all relative, right? So even if you're looking at the Earth from far away, it seems like a small point size. It seems like something that is solvable. When you're close up to it, it never feels like that. So I think sometimes we need those resets in perspective. So I don't think it's necessarily that we have to isolate ourselves to be able to create, but I think sometimes you need to close away the noise to be able to see the truth.
And how can we build in ethics and morals, and how to explore which kind of ethics and which kind of morals and which kind of right people at the table? How do we build into the competing with the tech? Is there a way to do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think having artists to point out the critical flaws in systems, having writers, having, inviting people in to point out the obvious. I think sometimes that is something that we miss. We're often so caught up with like achieving the end goal, and we're not asking these questions along the way of like, what little things can we adapt? What little things can we change? And I think that whenever you have like a race of any kind, there's obviously such a race going on right now. So it's all about pushing through, about maximizing the amount of time that you have. And so everything else goes out of the way. And that means that you don't have diversity so often. You don't have like necessarily as many people with kids and families, or single parents, or people that haven't had a certain way through their life. You're having a very particular type of person, because only a certain type of person can afford to go to work in those places. You're closing so much off. I mean, I think also something like dearMoon project, I wish that there was someone that would carry it forward, through to the end. It doesn't have to be with our crew. But just this idea of being able to open up a project globally. You don't have to be affiliated to a nation that has a space program. You could have been from anywhere on Earth. It's not just, basically Russia or the US or China or Japan. It's like opening it up. Right?
But it's going back to what he said. What was his name?
Bill
again?
Anders.
Bill Anders.
Yeah.
He said something really profound after the Apollo trip. That's really tying into what you're...
He's from Apollo 8. Apollo 8, there were 3 people, so Frank Borman, Bill Anders, and Jim Lovell. And it was the first lunar circumnavigation. And our trip was meant to kind of completely follow that trajectory. And so we were answering the call that they had set in motion all those years before. And he said that they should have sent poets to understand the grandeur of what they had witnessed. Yeah. And, that they felt that even as scientists, as pilots, that they were not equipped with the language that you needed to describe the human condition and reflect on it effectively. And we still have not done that. We're still in a position where unless you fit a certain profile, certain kind of life path, you have to have the right stuff, and having the right stuff is a very particular, it looks like a middle-aged white man. Yeah. Let's be real. That's what it looks like. If you're not a middle-aged white man, you don't have the right stuff. Everyone else is like, how can we bend the rules to let you in? Oh, we've got so many doubts. Yeah. It's like, oh, you thinking of having kids soon? Yeah, maybe not. Yeah. There's a lot of these kind of like questions around the access, because there's so much gatekeeping that goes on behind the scenes that is so built into the structures and the powers that be, and we don't question them.
That's the nature of power, because the nature of power is to hold it for yourself and to exclude others from it, and to be able to have a seat at the table is an act of violence, almost. That's something you have to demand and take and ask to be a part of. Did you feel that weight on your shoulders, being the only woman in the crew and also being who you are in the life that you're leading? Whether you wanted to or not, you were a role model then and there.
Yeah. I mean, that was the hardest. Yeah, that was the hardest part, is actually feeling that weight. Truly, I think that's what it got me from the moment that I was selected. So as the only woman on the confirmed crew, the other men on the crew could look around and they could imagine themselves doing this in some other form. I just knew that this was the only chance. This was the only way anyone like me was ever going to have this opportunity. There was no other path. Yeah. And there is without like some resurrection of a similar project, people like me will never go. Yeah. I don't look right and I don't sound right and I'm messy and I'm not perfect and I'm real, and that's such a big weight of responsibility. I felt that I had to represent like all women. Exactly. The men didn't feel like they had to represent all men,
but they're always
because men have already been there, and men have already done these things.
Yeah.
No woman has ever, as of now, been to the moon, right? That has never happened. So women, half of the people on this planet have never seen anyone in their image do this thing. 24 men have been to the moon's surface, and Yeah, like 24 men have been to the moon, and you know, a number have been to the moon surface, and the reality is that there is no one like me.
Yeah.
And so, and as an out queer person, you know, it's also really difficult because you feel that there is, you want to be, you're kind of caught between this, like, the expectation to be like the good gay, right? To be like the respectable gay that you want to bring home to your parents. That is like, you know, when little Jimmy is coming out of the closet in the Midwest to his evangelical parents, that they can say, oh, you know what, but she's not so bad, so therefore it makes it okay. But if I put a foot wrong, it'll be like, I'll be thrown under the bus. I'll be the bad example. I don't want to harm people's lives. You know, so there was always this thing of like, I want to be representative and I want to be real and I want to be flawed and I want to show everyone that you can be imperfect and you can still be there. But you're also caught with this like thing where you need to uphold, you need to be perfect in a different way. And then you're not being yourself and you're not being real and you're perpetuating a problem. So I was always feeling like the intense pressure between like the freedom to be myself and to be my messy self, which is authentic, or to be this like perfect version that is a lie and it doesn't help anyone. So I don't know, but I still wanted little Jimmy in the Midwest to feel okay to come out to his parents.
He should always feel okay, like.
And you know, the world isn't that, you know, we're looking at a world right now, like Russia sends a lot of people to space, right? Russia is not a friendly nation for people like me. You know, we're in the world right now where you can still get the death penalty in Uganda. And space is this symbolic thing, and especially for queer people, because there's no rule out there legislating against my existence. There's no one that's going to throw me in prison. There's no jail for me to go to. It's free out there. But to get there, there are so many pathways where you're blocked.
But it's such a human shitty construct, because when they were evaluating everyone, no matter the gender or sexual orientation or where you come from or whatever, they were doing really strict evaluations about what your body could handle. So it was really, really scientific, biological, and very like black and white. So for the process to be so democratic in a way, because it doesn't matter who you are. If your body can take it, then you're out, right? That's a very, very honest way of screening something. Starting from there and then putting all these other layers on it, it's so unfair because we had it right in the first square, right? And that's so sad. And that's the human curse or nature to always fuck up everything that is not for us to perfectly display.
Well, it's like the question of like, what is the perfect box? You know, what are the criteria that you're looking for when you're looking for people who've never done anything like it before? Like, why are we deciding these arbitrary criteria? Why have we decided that these are the standards that we need to uphold? Like, what is that? It's this whole, you know, of course, as part of this, you know, you have to do psychological testing. You have to, you know, you have to reckon with your own mortality. You have to be willing to die for it, right? You have to be willing to say, okay, this is important enough for me to actually die for. And there is a pretty high chance that something could go wrong and I could die. And I have to be like sure that the reason why I'm doing this is not because it's a vanity project, but because I think it's like an important thing. And for me, the most important thing, like even beyond the art that I wanted to create, was open doors for people to think of themselves in a different way, or to imagine themselves out there, to be able to see themselves at the table, you know, and that is so important. And it's like, how do we decide on the boxes? And so I needed to be a part of this project to prove that the parameters of those boxes could move. You know, I wanted to push against the sides of those boxes and to
we
open it
talked
up.
earlier, you said something that for you it was more important, no matter the box, what it contained, whether it's good or bad or evil or not evil or whatever, always be inside it to be able to change it from within. In Sweden, we have the saying, hellre mandat än plakat. That's the saying that says, rather have a mandate than a placate on the outside. And that's so important that you're lifting this, because the artist eye is always the one that is needed. But I don't think we can always handle.
No, I mean, the arts are always the first thing to go. Whenever you have a government budget and they're cutting funding, it's always like, yeah, let's cut arts funding first. No one really wants a critic in the midst. You're watching this political situation right now in the world where, we want to cut away regulation and red tape and this and that. And a lot of those things are there and they're unnecessary. And then a lot of those things are there for safeguarding purposes. And so it's like important to know what you're chopping down.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's what the artist's role is to point out, well, what is worth chopping down and what is not. And it's unfortunate that so often it's the artists that get chopped down first.
Yeah, which is very, very ironic and sad, because when we have a breakup, we go to art and music and literature. When something big happens in our lives, we tend to search for the creatives that have written about what we're feeling. When Corona happened and the world closed down, we all faced art. Mm-hmm. So when humanity is suffering, we go to art. And we want to explore, we go to art, but we never give it any real meaning or funding in the everyday life, so to speak.
No, we don't value it as a real job. I mean, I was lucky enough to be born in Ireland, and Ireland is one of the few nations that does have a slightly different attitude to art, in the sense that, that it's a massive part of the cultural identity of Ireland. And it's also, there were great tax breaks for artists and all sorts of things, because it was considered to be like a necessary function of a healthy society. But until we're at that point, we're still never going to see artists in space. That's the point. And we're working with, very, very rich people with governments that don't necessarily value it. Yeah. And so we're never going to have people being able to point out the critical flaws. But it's very sad that it's always the arts that go first. And I do really strongly believe that there's no point in me standing outside of something of the glass and I'm hurling bricks at it and they're just bouncing off, like the shatterproof glass. I think if you're going to have a conversation with someone and they can see a different perspective, you're much more likely to kind of reach some consensus. And it's like, now, I exist in this internet world. I'll post something on the internet. Someone will troll me. Like when this happened, of course, I had every single comment. Oh, why where did she get her haircut from? Oh, can't believe, oh dear, they, them, queer. Ooh, I just had all of the stuff thrown at me all the time, right? Every insult. And I was like, all right. Yeah. Because you open yourself up to that, you're gonna have this kind of criticism.
But does that ever sink through? Does that any of that a single word?
No,
ever...
I'm a fighter. I am so stubborn. I spoke to
you about this. Tell about that. You are a fighter.
Yeah, really.
Should we tell them the zombie story? Okay, so
sure.
we had a little conversation before.
Yeah,
and we were talking about how humanity really, really sucks. And my kid is 13, and she's sitting over there. And when she was 10, we were watching zombie movies and the end of the world. And she's a girl. And I said to her, if the world comes to an end and the zombies are eating everyone, please don't survive. Because if you do, then you have to repopulate the world, mostly against your will, because some ticket will not be on the plate. And you have to give birth to a bunch of kids, probably being raped by a bunch of zombie killers.
See, it's quite out there, this story.
So I'm a weird mom. But I told you this story. But then you said something completely different, which made me change my mind.
I just want to be the last person standing. If the zombies bit my arm, I would hack off my own arm and throw it to them so that I can run in the opposite direction. I don't know. I kind of think otherwise you're just giving up and you're just handing the world over, right? You have to be the person that's fighting tooth and nail for your right to exist. I think that's part of, I think maybe as a queer woman, that has been, you have to fight tooth and nail for your right to exist in every space. Yeah. No pun. I keep using that word space, and here we are talking about space. But it's how male-dominated this industry is, and you're just looking around a room.
Already
and there's
fighting
not that many women. And
zombies.
You're already fighting zombies every day. Yeah. That's the reality.
So join her team.
Come to my side.
Yeah. But I mean, how do you deal with that, though? Being a fighter, yet you're so gentle and you're so loving, and throughout your work, you have seen not the best sides of humanity. But the worst side is often very, very close to the most beautiful side of us. Yeah. And how do how do you have space for that in your own being? And why is it important to constantly show those things?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think most humans want the same things for themselves. I actually think that we have far more similarity than we have difference. Most humans want the same things, and we are scared of the same things. You know, we're scared about losing our security, our homes, our families, of not being able to eat, not having somewhere to sleep at night. Those are great, like, universal truths. And even in the places where I've spent time, and on the surface, it seems like, you know, everyone is at each other's throats. This side can't agree with this side. You can't reach any consensus. Like, I'm sitting there on the internet, you know, with all these people slating my hair and whatever else. But then you're like, okay, well, that person's probably miserable. Why are they miserable? What are we doing to make that person miserable? And if I can just find out, like, why that person is so miserable, maybe I can find a way to make them less miserable, and then they will be less horrible to the next person. It's like small, tiny degrees, like changing one person's mind about something. Like with this project, you know, it's very strange for me to be exhibiting work which is like still in development. Like, this is a really fresh, like, trauma for me, right? So like, me hanging this show, it was really emotional, okay? Because it's like, this was my life. It wasn't a piece of work. It was like, no, this is my real life, and I'm still living it. And it's like having like a really horrible breakup with someone, and it just to be broadcast on the internet, and like to be spoken about in public and on a stage talking about this breakup. And it feels very surreal. It's like I'm an actor in my own life sometimes. And, you know, there's a kind of a vulnerability there, which is not something that, you know, I usually expose as part of my work so early on in the process of coming to terms with making it. You know, it's always there as a thread, but this is like very raw. But I think that stuff is really important, because I think that
because
we
of
can't
the weight
heal.
on your shoulders from
And how is anyone ever going to learn from this experience that actually you can't just play with people's lives? Like, number one, this is a real person and a real person's life, and not just like a number on a, not like the first this and the number one of this and the, you know, I'm an actual person. And so I think like showing this kind of work and being vulnerable in this position has been a really important part of the kind of the process, because I don't normally make work about myself. But this has been like, well, how do you make work to kind of change by degree? And in this circumstance, it happens to be like putting myself out there, and to be put myself as part of the subject, you know, to be vulnerable in that. Even though it's so difficult for me, like, I'm not the person, like, you'll never normally, I'm not the person that cries, right? I'm not a person who's like, if I needed to cry, I'd disappear in the corner. And it's, but this hasn't been like that. It's been like completely just all out there the whole time. And that's felt complicated, because it's all the things that people think that women shouldn't be. Right? You should just be tough, and you should just take it. And we shouldn't show any emotion, and we need to learn to be more male to get on in the world. And
but I mean, isn't men really emotional beings? Because women have been we have been taught over the years to not show emotions, because it's really deadly for us in many ways, if we show too much emotion. But men can be very emotional, with all the negative ones, of course, so you doing that, showing this, is, I think, tremendous, because we all can show that in ourselves, in our small worlds.
I think it's hard as a woman, because it's so complicated to not seem weak. Like, I think we praise men for having emotion. We say, like, well done, you've bucked the trend of your own sex to come to this other side. We pat them on the back and we tell them they've done a really good job, that they've come a long way. If a woman does it, we don't have that attitude, right? We're just like, women, so emotional, always getting in the way. God, can't they be critical? You know, and that's exhausting. And that's like a weight you carry with you your whole life. And I am probably guilty of becoming very male in certain aspects of my personage, because I'm often like, I'm in the photo world and it's mainly men, right? It's mainly men all the time. I walk into a room, it's men talking about lenses and gear, and they don't think that I know how to press a button as well as they know how to press a button. And I'm like, oh, this is exhausting.
But do you remember Malcolm X used to say, by any means necessary? So I really believe in that, because that makes you, since you are a woman, almost always alone in different variations of rooms with men, then of course you have to adapt, and the survival of the fittest and whatnot. You have to adapt yourself to the surrounding to be able to push them forward to another way. You can't always be butting heads.
No, and it isn't.
It's
And
not.
it's like learning how to butter people up in the right way, and like
Exactly.
learning how to be like, oh, I know your ego is fragile, so I'm just gonna like gently massage you, give you like
Yeah.
3 compliments, and then stick the knife in. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
very
feel
exhausting.
You guys feel that, women, right?
very
You know
exhausting.
what we're talking about.
Sorry, men in the audience.
Guys,
it's
you
real.
need to talk to the women in your lives to understand.
And
this,
I'll
I
arm
think.
wrestle any one of you afterwards if you want.
And I'll help.
But it's I
Yeah.
mean, joking aside though, it's a real thing, and especially because, you know, historically it is men that are running the world.
Yeah.
There's no female billionaire buying their own ticket out to space right now. That's like not really happening, right? We're not having female billionaires
Yeah.
doing that. So what we're seeing is this like
Yeah.
very visible show of what it looks like to travel beyond is a very particular type of person. And it's a very particular type of attitude. And the things, and if this is the ultimate dream of the human race, is to travel beyond and
Yeah.
out there, what we're seeing is the only people who have the ability to do that are not us.
It's not representative either. Do you guys remember the movie Avatar? Have you seen it? Yeah. It's also the same thing. We're bringing to another planet and fucking it up in the same way that we did here for greed and money and power. And it's the same people doing the same thing to a new ecosystem. And I'm thinking, if we don't want that to happen, we want to change it. We want to change it on Earth. We want to change it between men and women. We want us to coexist in a much more balanced way, so to say. And we don't want to bring that to space or anywhere at all. We want to also maybe flourish this place. Where do you think we should start? Like, from your perspective, what can I do tomorrow when I wake up? A small thing that I can change just on my outlook.
I think, honestly, it's about reading and getting involved and understanding. I think, like, you know, most of us see, like, say the space industry, you read about it in the technology pages, and it's often the part of the newspaper that people skip through. It's like, well, I'm not interested in that. I'm just going to skip through that bit. Or it's in the business section. I don't really care about that. And you're not reading like this outer space treaty. You're not sitting there going like, what does this mean for us in terms of wars and the military, and what does this mean? Like, it's something that we should be on the streets like campaigning for, but no one is. And at some point in the future, there will be people sitting there and they will be campaigning, and it'll be too late.
Do we deserve that then?
Well, no, I think that I don't know if I don't think we deserve anything. I think we make our own luck, like in life, so much of the time. And I think like we have choices to make, and that we have choices to what we open our eyes to. And I think that it's also the way that this stuff is reported about. Like, I'm really interested in this like intersection between fact and fiction, like you said in the introduction, and how the fictional version of, like, for instance, space has overtaken our cultural consciousness, where we can't tell what is real and what is not anymore. And that is like a cautionary tale for so many aspects in our lives, you know. And I think by looking at this as an example of something that we could get involved with now and understand more about, and how this affects all of us, then we have a chance to change the course of it. But we're not going to change the course of it when, like, right now it's like mud that is still moving. There's still space for things to move, right? There's still room for change. But, you know, give it another 50 years, how many more of these aspects are going to be cemented, and we can't move them? And so, you know, the problem is always that we get involved in things too late. It should be that we're like writing to space agencies and saying like, what have you done to, you know, critically engage, you know, with the public? Not just find the fans who are into the subject, but like, what are you doing to reach outside of that box? Like, you know, maybe you should send an artist with you. Maybe you should have a journalist who can write like a real critical look at the state of the world, instead of it just always feeling like that you are not interacting with those agencies, you're being kind of subversive outside of them. I think it's important to kind of bring the conversation together. And, you know, like, I really think that projects like ours will happen in the future. Like, I have a high hope that will happen.
I think so too.
But I the luxurious point about this was that we could go out with private funding. A lot of people talk about this project and they say, oh, it would have been better if it was like a NASA supported project, or it would have been better if it was like ESA.
Yeah.
Now, I don't agree with that for the main reason that if you go as a government envoy, you have to reflect the opinions and support the viewpoints of that government. And I really do believe in the true power of subversion. It's just super unfortunate to me that the people who have the means to get to space are the people that have all of the wealth. They're not the artists that have that subversive quality. I think that we need to be having programs where it's like a foundation that is funded, from many different people. So it's not just one person controlling it, but there is a foundation which is like supporting this idea of artists in space to have that kind of critical engagement, to point out the flaws in the system. I have a good friend of mine, Lewis Bush, and he made this project which was about NASA and its involvement with Nazi Germany and bringing in, Nazi rocket scientists to basically take people to the moon and beyond. And, it was interesting because when I had spent time at NASA, a couple of people had brought up this subject, but it was always in like kind of hushed tones. So it was always like, well, how do we talk about those things?
Yeah.
And there are projects going on, but it's like those people never know about them. There's no like dialogue between that. So there's not like this mirror imaging. And I think it's important that we do, have those like projects that are critical of the space industry should be shown in spaces where those people who are building this world should see them. It shouldn't just be like we make art sometimes is in this echo chamber where we just make it for other people that are just like us.
Yeah.
And I think the importance of like a project like dearMoon was actually about suddenly you have a global audience. So if you want to be critical with something, space if you want to have a global audience, there is no bigger audience than the people that are interested in space.
Exactly.
So you want to really critically engage. You want to talk about equality. You want to talk about like for me, speaking about queer people in space, to have myself being out there and to have kids in Russia being able to see me, to have kids in Uganda being able to see me, that was important.
That's very important.
Because that's the visual. And there is no greater visual than space. And there's no greater like kind of boundary breaking platform. And so if we want like art to ever change the world, it's actually not necessarily in a gallery space, even though we're in an incredible gallery space right now. It's actually finding, breaking out of these walls and taking it somewhere else and creating work that is as impactful as the Earthrise image. Yeah. Like owned by the public, for the public good.
And attainable by the public. So we don't want kids growing up thinking, oh, I want to be an astronaut, and the mother and father is laughing because, yeah, sure you do, because that's not going to happen. But we want everybody to be able to say, I want to be able to maybe not be an astronaut, but I want to travel to space, I want to explore space, and we should always see that as something attainable.
Yeah, I think like the language is really important. Like I'm going to be clear, I don't want to be an astronaut.
No.
I've never wanted to be an astronaut. If I wanted to be an astronaut, I would have paid more attention in physics class.
No.
I didn't
but
want
you
to
have
be an
the
astronaut.
body physics for an astronaut. That's proven. Do we have any questions? Should we let them in?
Sure.
What do you guys think? Do you have any questions? Anybody wants to ask something?
I'm obviously not that shy.
I can't see so much. No? Nobody's asking.
They're being very
anything.
quiet.
This is very Swedish also.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
there you go. Are you not Swedish? What's your question?
What was your first? Sorry. Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's a personal question, but what did you feel when you first got to know that the mission was cancelled?
I mean, you can see a little bit on the video that's out there in the show. You can see. So the first conversation that we had when the mission was cancelled, I'm really trying to hold my shit together. Like you have to save face until it's over. And then I just broke down because it wasn't for me. As I said before, it wasn't just a loss for me. It was like, wow, the loss that this means, I kind of thought that our project would be the first of a lot of projects like this to start to chip away at this veneer. And the loss of our project just turned the whole thing into kind of a joke. And I think the risk of ever turning something into a joke, because it becomes a lot harder for someone else to pick it up and to pick up those pieces. And so I was afraid of that, you know. I'm afraid of what the world looks like without having critical engagement with it. The closer I got to space, the more I was, you know, enthralled by it and appalled by it in equal measure, you know. Yeah, I think like rubbing up against it, like you see this incredible feats of engineering, you think it's incredible. Like, how can humans do this actually?
Yeah.
You know, like when you stand in front of Starship and you're there the day before and you're looking at this object and you cannot believe for 1 second that that is ever going to leave the Earth. It's like standing in front of a tower block, like a huge tower block, and you're watching this thing leave the Earth. It's the most emotional experience. You know, it's completely life transforming. Everyone should see a rocket launch. Like, truly, there's nothing else like it. But also, you think, if there's no checks and balances, like, where could this go wrong?
Yeah.
And I think, like, I had been really thinking about that deeply for 3 years of my life. You know, so I was selected for this project, and that was amazing. But the main part for me was like, how do I make sure that, you know, I'm doing right by everyone and I'm doing the best work that I can ever make, and I'm thinking about absolutely like everything that could ever be thought about, so I'm not screwing it up, that I'm being true to myself, being true to everyone, being true to the other million people that applied and didn't get to go. You know, like that weight of responsibility was so major, and I just felt that like crushed down on me like a building falling on my body. That's how it felt like when it was cancelled. It was like, yeah, it wasn't just like, oh, shame, just go and do something else now. I was like, well, I can't unsee it. Like, I can't unsee the risk and the damage and my fear and all of those other things, as well as I could see like the joy and the opportunity. I could never unsee that. So,
yeah. We have another question here and then one in the back.
Yeah. First off, thank you for representing such a broad spectrum of humanity. That's awesome. And I was wondering, to what degree do you think the project itself can be sort of put to use as a roadmap for artistic endeavors in the future, so that others might not need to reinvent the wheel?
yeah, I mean, I think that there was a lot of good with the project. If it was up to me and I was curating it, you wouldn't have had 7 men and 1 woman.
Yeah.
That's quite clear. It would not have been so American-centric. There were a lot of things about the selection process that I just, if the ball had been in my court, it wouldn't have looked like that. But I think like the principles of having like a benefactor, that's not such a bad thing, but you have to make sure that that person understands the responsibility that comes with it, and that it is real people's lives. While you might be able to resurrect and change your mind like later on, and, you know, our funder could turn around in 5 years' time and say, hey, it's all up and running, cool, I'm going to buy a ticket. You know, we'll never have that opportunity. So it's much more about like understanding the responsibility of the weight that you're putting people through. Because I don't think if you have the ability to buy it, you ever really feel the weight, because you know that you can just change your mind at some other future point. Whereas if you don't have that opportunity, you always feel that weight like all the way through, because you know that it's the once in a lifetime opportunity and you can't waste it, and you don't want to waste it for anyone else. So I think that there should be something much more like a foundation to kind of protect and insulate against that from happening. So it's not just a one person thing, which is the rug pull. I think it's a really important project, in the sense that I think that we do need some real hardcore critical engagement with the space industry. And I think we need to have more diversity represented in space. And that isn't always going to happen when if you want to be a trained astronaut, there is a very particular path. And it isn't that egalitarian. You know, I have immense respect for people that get to call themselves astronauts. And the only people who get to call themselves astronauts are people that have really dedicated their entire lives to the craft. And I think that's incredible, but that is only if you come from a certain part of the world.
Yeah.
It's only if you can have a certain education level that not everyone can afford. You know, I couldn't have paid for myself to go through flight school, or, you know, I disagree with the military more generally, so I wouldn't have joined the military. There's lots of areas where like people like me could never be. And I think that projects like this, you need to have that to be able to actually represent true diversity. And I think without that, you're never going to have that. You're only going to have, as I said, people that can afford to pay for it. And I do sort of believe that you don't get to be a billionaire by being Mr. Nice Guy, generally. Like, you just don't. You don't get to be a billionaire because you were everyone's friend. And, you know, that isn't just how it works. You often kind of make hardcore business decisions. And sometimes you need a bit of softness in all of this. And like, as much as I can respect someone that's self-made, I also wish that there was a bit of softness. And I think that the only way that we're ever going to have that truly is by having foundations that are putting energy into this. You know, I couldn't even, you know, I was lucky that I was even able to stand on the land in NASA because I have a green card. But if I didn't have a green card, I couldn't get past the gates, you know? So even when we were like in SpaceX, you know, we had different colored badges depending on like what nationality you had. There is like you are allowed to access this and you're not allowed to access that. Like, there is a gatekeeping that goes on with everything, with access. And I don't think people necessarily understand that part, because it just, like, being an astronaut and reaching the stars is something we read about in storybooks. It's like something so unattainable that it seems almost magical. It seems like a fairy. But these are like real people with a real job, and there is an actual route. But there isn't a route otherwise. And I think that we need to start thinking about it if we want to have anything, any program like this going forward.
We had one more question in the back there.
Thank you. I thought that this presentation has been really interesting. We've talked a lot about space being attainable, which I think is a very interesting and respectable discussion as a queer woman myself. But we've also talked about how humans destroy everything in their way, like we talked about Avatar. But also there's a lot of discussions happening right now about space traveling being sustainable. You know, it requires quite a lot of resources that we currently are running out of on this earth. So I wonder a little bit about, you know, do we really want space travel to become more attainable for like anyone at all?
I'm really genuinely not interested in just like going around the earth for 2 minutes and looking down on it and going, okay, cool, that was a nice view out of the window. Like, that's not me. I think like if you have the responsibility of leaving Earth, you should be doing it for a greater purpose than yourself, like fundamentally. So I think that's why I would be much more inclined to sort of back like a foundation that was sending, you know, a group of people, you know, like one seat per year or something like that, because the space industry is not going anywhere. It is happening. There's no stopping it. So again, I could like throw bricks at the glass, but I'd rather be there having a conversation about how we can do better. And, you know, of course, like the environmental impact of space cannot be understated. And I think, you know, why SpaceX was interesting to me also is because it was the world's first fully reusable rocket. There was going to be less space junk as a result of projects like SpaceX. And our particular billionaire was funding this trip, and the money from our trip helps to fund the development of a reusable rocket. So I think that there are ways of doing this more responsibly. I don't necessarily think that, you know, we should just be catching the bus to space and looking out of the window, and where it's like the very rich who get to have that experience and often don't really share it with the world, honestly. What are they sharing? A photograph from the window, which we've seen 1,000 times. Like, what are they actually sharing? Like, what good are we getting out of it other than suffering from the pollution associated? I don't really see. Yeah. But of course, I am supportive of the science, and I think we can learn a lot from space. I think, you know, the environmental movement, as I said earlier, Bill Anders' picture of Earthrise, like it wouldn't be the way it is now were it not for that image. I think that's really important. I think it's important to be able to think of ourselves as unified as a species, not just as individuals. And I think that's what's been very sad for me, and the way that the space industry way that the commercial aspects of the space industry have existed in the last few years. It's very much like about the kind of the hero walkout of these like mega wealthy men generally who take a picture out of the window and they're saying like, we're taking a step forward for humanity. And you're like, no, but not really. Like, what are you
It's
doing?
for your bros.
Like, what are you doing? You're just getting bar kudos. Like,
Yeah.
you know, what's that for? So I don't know. I like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think it's going to happen anyway. And I don't think we're going to be able to go, oh, we're just going to stop it. Like, it's been going on for a very long time. We're never going to turn around and be like, look, we're going to just halt the space industry. So how do we just do things better?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from having people at the table to go, hang on a minute, have you thought about? And if we don't have that, that's just where it all goes wrong.
Yeah. And that's the fighter in you. I really like it.
Yeah.
I think we have gone over time really, sorry, a lot. But I just want to say, have you guys heard about Douglas Adams, the author of Hitchhiker's Guide? He says in the opening lines, it says, in the beginning, the universe was created. And that made a lot of people angry and is widely regarded a bad move. So with that, we want to thank you so much. And please look at the exhibition and the work of Rhiannon.
And my misery on full parade.
Thank you. Thank you so much.